Now that we have our meta principles set up, it is time to go into our theistic confirmation rules. These confirmation rules will need to be applied in any case where we discuss and debate about if some observation counts as evidence in support of theism. Given that theism must be conjoined with an auxiliary hypothesis to make predictions as we went over earlier, then we need some filters. One cannot include any auxiliary assumptions, in this case assumptions of value. But combining confirmational holism with Bayesian confirmation theory will be essential to our project. So every theistic prediction is generated when we combine theism with an axiology, call these T&A. When you conjoin a hypothesis with an auxiliary hypothesis, you are testing both hypotheses, and thus you don't need to independently confirm the auxiliary hypothesis independently of the main hypothesis, because it is only the conjunction of two where you make predictions and thus can gather evidence. And the evidence you gather confirms both. The evidence one gathers is retrodiction, and so it can be based on the information gathered after the fact. In the case of theism, this does not imply that E would provide conclusive confirmation of T and A, since one can always find evidence that favors not T in that case. You have the probability E conditional on not T be greater than the probability of E conditional on T and A, but the issue is that there are multiple versions of A representing axiological assumptions, and theists are free to update based on them. Theism won't be in tension with A as long as it follows these confirmation rules. 1. T and A are relevant to each other too. The probability of A is not 0 and is not intrinsically improbable. 3. E doesn't decrease the probability of A, for E doesn't entail a violation of the ultimate goodness principle and doesn't satisfy the axiological irrelevance thesis 5. E is a subset of T and A 6. The probability of E conditional on T and A is greater than the probability of E conditional on T and not A. Using these, we can have an updating rule. One can update on A based on E if the probability of E conditional on T and A1 is greater than the probability of E conditional on T and A2. Now it depends on what we are updating on, but generally, as long as the theist follows the above rules, then they can always update their axiology, auxiliary assumptions, to account for the data. This is because the probability that God does an axiological relevant action is 1, thus, any axiology that describes values won't do any damage to theism's probability, given that theism logically overlaps with axiology. Thus, anytime we find axiological relevance, it will always increase T and A, given that T and A predicts axiological relevance.